Hey guys, what do you get when you have a person that pulls their phone out at every occasion, doesn't pay attention, and wants to be the main character all in one? Well, you get a person named Elise. That's who this story today is about. Alright, so this might be a long one, so apologies in advance. A couple of friends and I got into Pathfinder a few years back, and we enjoy the freedom that the system gives us, and play heavily homebrewed worlds with heavy roleplay. The cast of characters are myself as the DM, Steve, who was a half-elf ranger, as well as being my roommate at the time, Patrick, who was a dwarf druid, and then we had Neil, who was a human elemental sorcerer and was a close personal friend who started his own campaign. And then lastly, we have the problem player themselves, Elise, who was an elf rogue, and a close friend to Neil and I. So, after a couple of sessions, Neil loved Pathfinder so much that he decided to start his own campaign, and he invited Elise and I to play, as we all lived pretty close to each other. Now, Elise was a very closed-off person from Session 1. She obviously wasn't super comfortable with the roleplay aspect, which I had informed her about in a personal Session 0, and she decided that she wanted in, and loved everything that I threw at her. But I obviously gave her more time to grow more accustomed to it. And when she did, Elise loved the spotlight, and loved being the center of attention, and absolutely loved when the story revolved around her. She also had a particular fondness for combat. She loved it. She really loved it. She also made no secret out of it that she didn't care about the other players. She didn't engage in any roleplay, as she had the habit of tuning out whenever the spotlight wasn't on her. This was problematic, because in a story-driven world where everything revolves around the players and their choices, she didn't weigh in once. She had also made the most basic and bland backstory that I had ever seen. But despite this, I had created an elaborate story around her, tying into the other stories of the other characters. And whenever something crossed over from her story to another player's, she would literally pull out her phone and tune out again. I was getting pretty frustrated, but I decided to keep on going, finding new ways to introduce more combat and more her-centered content while trying to balance the other players on the other hand. Trying desperately to not turn this into the Elise show, and trying to stay true to the core of my game, which, again, was very story and roleplay heavy. So, as per usual, if you have a player that isn't really partaking in the story or role-playing or really doing much beyond a single thing, then you should probably talk to them and eventually remove them because they are obviously not a fit. I would say if they aren't being a particularly egregious butt munch, then you can try to talk to them and see if they will be a little bit more involved in the campaign. If you want a roleplay heavy game, but they're not a heavy roleplayer, then maybe it would be best to just go your separate ways as far as the game is concerned. After 3 sessions that completely revolved around her, I thought, every sane person will understand that a session can now revolve around another person's story. But boy, was I wrong. The next session revolved around Patrick's story, finding his long-lost mentor in a swampy forest. The instant that Elise figured out that the session wasn't going to be shining a bright stage light on her, she again tuned out. This time I ignored it and endured the "wait, what's happening?" moments when we needed a check from her. But my players were obviously getting annoyed at her too. So why didn't you talk to her at this point? My breaking point came a couple of sessions later, where I had spent a week in tying in every player's story into a massive main plot that established everyone's role in defeating the BBEG, in a way that was relevant to everyone's story. I'm ashamed to admit, but at least 3 of those days went into, how can I make sure that Elise is happy? And by now, surely I'd seen the signs that this person shouldn't have been playing a cooperative game with other people. It shouldn't have taken that long, buddy. Especially when you're going out of your way to make entire portions of the story revolve around this person so that they will actually involve themselves in your game. When we came to the relevant part of the session in which the complete story unfolded before them, which was being narrated by Patrick's mentor, I saw every player's eyes widen in anticipation. Everyone absolutely loved the story that I was putting down. All except for one person, who you should know by now, Elise. She was literally yawning through my story, rolling her eyes and pulling out her phone. I ignored this and basked in the enthusiasm of the other players. And that day, Patrick and Steve came to me and congratulated me on a very epic session, and voiced their concerns about Elise. I was contemplating to remove her from the table at this point, seeing as how she was clearly bored, not engaged, and her spot on my table could be filled by a myriad of people who know that I run TTRPG games that have basically begged me for a spot, but have always refused on account of having a full table. And then we have the final straw that broke the camel's back. We were playing Session 2 of Neil's campaign, and were standing at a crossroads, with a person who was running down one of the paths screaming for help. I was playing a paladin, and was obviously inclined in helping people in need, to which my character voiced to the group. Elise, now playing a sorcerer for some reason, didn't want to help, so the rest of the party chose that they wanted to help as well. To which Elise made a snarky comment about how, I see that this guy is going to be railroading as much as OP. Cue Neil and me doing a simultaneous spit take, and asking her where in which plane in the great beyond that either of our campaigns were railroading people. I go to great lengths to not railroad my players, and this has been a central trait of my campaign since Session 1. And to Neil's defense, the first couple of sessions, you need a central line to establish the plot. But we could have walked either way there without Neil batting an eye. It goes without saying that I've removed her from the table since, and since Elise has left, the quality of our sessions has increased dramatically. No surprise there. And I've written a long letter of apology to her, stating that failure to entertain her as a player was my fault, and a different style of DM might be more suited to her needs as a player. And we didn't speak for 2 years. To add to this, the people in the comments are being very supportive of my actions, but are also saying that the letter I wrote her was unnecessary. And I agree. But the reason why I wrote it was to try to preserve a shred of friendship, as Neil, Elise, and I used to be pretty tight. Well, OP, I don't know how your friendship is with Elise now, but by the sounds of it, it kinda sounds like she was not too particularly fond of you, even before you kicked her out. It sounds like it was kinda just one of those things where, you know, friendships die. It's the thing that happens, and that's kinda what it sounds like happened here. But it also sounds like that Elise is not a particularly good player either. I don't think it's a different DM being the right choice for her so much as she's not really a good player choice for any DM. Someone that only really pays attention when the spotlight is on them is really no fun to have in a game, in pretty much any context. At least in my own experience. Your mileage may vary. Really though, should have removed her faster. But in any case, that's the end of the story. So, as always, have a good one.